They say the soul weighs 21 grams. I know this is false. A soul weighs exactly as much as the choice that damns it. My name was Alexei Volnov, of Verdan Prime, sanctioned psyker, astropathic adept. Brother, I volunteered for the Astronomican, believing it was humanity's highest calling, the Emperor's most sacred service. I was told volunteers were blessed, that our sacrifice would be remembered, that the light would embrace us with divine purpose. I volunteered to save my sister. I succeeded, but the cost was something far worse than death. It was the weight of knowing I chose it. I had what most psykers in the Imperium could never dream of, a life. Not survival, not mere existence in the belly of a black ship or chained in some planetary dungeon awaiting execution. An actual life with purpose and dignity and something resembling peace. Verdan Prime was a civilized world, the kind the propaganda reels show when they want to remind citizens what the Imperium protects. Tall spires of white stone reaching toward clean skies. Gardens maintained by servitors programmed for aesthetic precision rather than pure function. Citizens who died of old age rather than industrial accidents or gang violence or any of the 1,000 mundane horrors that claim most imperial lives. I served in the planetary astropathic choir, one of 43 sanctioned psykers bound to the communication networks that kept Verdan Prime connected to the wider Imperium. The work was demanding, but not cruel. We transmitted messages between worlds, received orders from Sector Command, maintained the gossamer threads of communication that held human civilization together across the vast and terrible dark. We were useful. We were valued. We were not disposable. My chambers in the astropathic spire overlooked the garden of contemplation, where citizens came to pray and reflect beneath imported trees from a dozen different worlds. I could watch children play there, their laughter rising like music through my reinforced windows. I could see couples walking hand in hand, elderly citizens feeding the imported birds, all the small normalcies that exist only in the Imperium's most fortunate corners. It was a good life. I knew how rare that was for someone touched by the warp. My sister Katya had it even better, in some ways. 3 years younger than me, she had manifested her psychic abilities at age 13, and I had immediately reported it to the authorities. This sounds like betrayal to those who do not understand. It was the opposite. Unreported psykers are executed when discovered. Or worse, they lose control and become doorways for the horrors of the immaterium. I reported her because I loved her. Because I wanted her to survive the sanctioning process, as I had. She endured the black ships and the soul binding on Terra. She returned hollow-eyed and forever changed. As all sanctioned psykers are, the ritual that binds our souls and makes us marginally safer to the Imperium burns away something essential. We all bear the scars, but she returned and she lived. And eventually, she found a new equilibrium. She joined me in the astropathic choir. We worked together, lived in adjacent chambers, shared meals in the spire's communal halls. We had survived the worst of what the Imperium does to psykers and emerged with our lives intact. For 7 years, this was our existence. The work was exhausting but manageable. The psychic defenses of the spire kept us safe from warp predation. The stipend provided by the administratum was sufficient for comfort. We were among the fortunate few, and we knew it. Every day we whispered prayers of gratitude to the Emperor for allowing us to serve in such relatively gentle circumstances. Then Katya began to deteriorate. It started with small things. Missed words during transmission, momentary losses of concentration, headaches that left her pale and shaking. I told myself it was fatigue, that she needed rest, that the work tempo had been demanding lately. We were processing intelligence reports from an ongoing campaign against an orc incursion in a neighboring sector. The volume of transmissions had tripled. Everyone was strained, but the symptoms worsened. She began to hear voices when no one was transmitting. She saw shadows that were not there, movements in her peripheral vision that vanished when confronted directly. Her control over her abilities became erratic. During one transmission, she accidentally broadcast on multiple channels simultaneously, creating a feedback loop that left 6 other choir members unconscious and bleeding from their ears. The choirmaster summoned me to his chambers. Magister Aldrich was ancient, over 200 years old, his life extended by juvenile treatments and the favor of the planetary governor. His body was withered, his eyes clouded with cataracts that somehow did not impair his psychic sight. He sat behind a desk of polished black wood, his gnarled hands folded before him. "Your sister is destabilizing," he said without preamble. Aldrich had never been one for gentle words. "The soul binding is failing. It happens. Rarely, but it happens. The psychic wards that keep our souls anchored to our bodies and the warp at bay can degrade over time. When they do, the outcome is always the same." I knew what he meant. A psyker whose binding fails becomes a liability, a weakness in reality's skin that demons can exploit. The Imperium's response to such failures is absolute and merciless. "How long?" I asked, my voice steady despite the ice spreading through my chest. "Weeks, perhaps. A month at most. I have already filed the required reports with the Arbites and the local inquisitorial representative. She will be remanded into custody within the next 10 days. The Emperor's mercy will be granted swiftly." The Emperor's mercy. Execution. My sister would be taken to a sanctioned chamber deep beneath the Arbites' fortress and killed with the sacred rites that prevent a psyker's death from tearing a hole in reality. Her body would be cremated. Her name would be entered in the rolls of the faithful departed, and I would continue my service, alone, in these comfortable chambers overlooking gardens where children played. "There must be another option," I said. Aldrich's expression did not change. "There is not. Be grateful she has these final days. Be grateful her ending will be clean rather than the alternative." The alternative. We both knew what that meant. Demonic possession. Catastrophic manifestation. Entire hive blocks consumed by warp fire. Thousands dead. As the immaterium poured through the breach, a single destabilized psyker created. Better a clean death than that horror. I bowed and withdrew. I returned to my chambers and sat in the darkness, watching the gardens below turn to shadow as night fell over Verdan Prime. Katya was going to die. My sister, who had survived the black ships and the soul binding, who had found joy again in small things, who laughed at my terrible jokes and sang quietly while working, would be executed in 10 days. I could not accept this. For 3 days, I searched for alternatives. I consulted the Spire's archives, reading every case study of failed bindings, every recorded instance of psychic destabilization. The outcomes were universal. Some psykers were taken by the black ships for emergency rebinding on Terra, but the procedure had a 97% fatality rate and was reserved for psykers of exceptional power or strategic importance. Katya qualified as neither. Some were placed in stasis and transported to research facilities where the Adeptus Mechanicus studied their condition. This fate was arguably worse than execution. On the 4th day, I found something else. A notice buried in the astropathic traffic we processed daily, one of thousands of routine transmissions that passed through our choir. A call for volunteers from the Adeptus Astra Telepathica, the Astronomican, the great psychic beacon that emanates from Holy Terra and guides ships through the warp, required a continuous supply of psykers to fuel its light. The transmission was matter of fact, almost perfunctory. Volunteers could present themselves at any black ship port. They would be transported to Terra. They would serve in the most sacred duty the Imperium offered its psykers. The transmission said nothing about the nature of that service. It did not mention duration or conditions. It simply stated that volunteers would be providing their psychic strength to maintain the Astronomican, that their sacrifice would be honored, that their service was essential to humanity's survival across the stars. I researched further. Information about the Astronomican was surprisingly sparse in the archives available to me. It was described as a psychic beacon of immense power, maintained by the combined efforts of thousands of psykers working in concert. The light, as it was called, allowed navigators to guide ships through the warp across distances that would otherwise be impossible. Without it, the Imperium would fragment into isolated systems, cut off from each other, unable to maintain the unity necessary for survival. Serving the Astronomican was described as the highest calling a psyker could achieve: direct service to the Emperor himself. The transmission mentioned that psykers of exceptional strength and purity were selected for this duty. It did not mention volunteers were rare. It did not mention what happened to those who served. The omissions were telling, but I was desperate enough to ignore them. On the 5th day, I presented my research to Katya. She was in her chambers, lying on her bed with the lights dimmed. The headaches had become constant. She wore a dampening circlet that suppressed her psychic abilities, but even that was providing diminishing relief. "There is a way," I told her. "A way for you to avoid execution." She opened her eyes, and I saw the pain there, the exhaustion that went deeper than physical fatigue. "Brother, do not torture yourself with false hope. I have accepted what comes. It is better this way. Better than the alternative. The Astronomican," I said. "It requires psykers, volunteers. If you present yourself, they will take you to Terra. You would serve there instead of facing execution here." Katya stared at me for a long moment. Then she laughed, a bitter sound without humor. "Alexei, do you know what the Astronomican does to those who serve it? Do you understand what volunteer means in this context? It means life instead of death," I said. "It means purpose instead of execution. It means burning," she replied. "The Astronomican consumes psykers, brother. It uses our souls as fuel for the light. Those who serve do not retire. They do not return. They burn until there is nothing left, and then they are replaced. This is not salvation. This is a different form of execution, drawn out and agonizing." "You do not know that," I said, though her words carried the weight of truth. The transmissions speak of honor and sacred duty. The transmissions lie. They lie because the Imperium needs psykers to volunteer, or at least to go without resistance. But everyone knows the truth. Alexei. The Astronomican is a funeral pyre that never stops burning. We sat in silence. Outside, the gardens were being prepared for morning. Servitors trimmed hedges with precise mechanical movements. The first citizens of the day began their walks. Life continued. "Then I will go instead," I said. Katya sat up, wincing at the movement. "What?" "I will volunteer. I will present myself as you. The Astra Telepathica does not care which psyker serves, only that they receive their quota. I will take your place." "That is insane." "That is the only way," I interrupted. "You stay here. You receive treatment. Perhaps the destabilization will stabilize. Perhaps the choir master is wrong about the timeline. You have a chance if you remain." I have nothing to lose. This was not entirely true. I had my comfortable life, my purpose, my chambers overlooking gardens. But I also had my sister, and the thought of her execution was a weight I could not bear. "I will not allow this," Katya said, her voice rising. "I will not let you die in my place." "You will," I replied, "because the alternative is your execution in 5 days, and I cannot watch that happen. I cannot continue serving in these comfortable halls knowing I let you die when I could have saved you." We argued for hours. She raged and wept and pleaded. I remained calm, implacable, my decision already made. Finally, exhausted, she collapsed back onto her bed. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you are my sister," I said simply. "Because I reported you when you manifested, knowing what that would mean, because I brought you into this life, and I will not abandon you to its cruelest outcome, because if our positions were reversed, you would do the same. She did not deny this. On the 6th day, I presented myself to Magister Uldrich. I told him I wished to volunteer for service in the Astronomican. He studied me with those clouded eyes that saw far more than their physical impairment suggested. "You are not the one destabilizing," he said. "Your binding remains strong. Your service here is valuable. Why would you volunteer for the Astronomican?" "Because it is humanity's most sacred duty," I replied, using the language from the transmissions. "Because I wish to serve the Emperor more directly. Because the work here no longer fulfills me." All lies, transparent and obvious. Uldrich saw through them immediately, but he also understood what I was truly asking, and why. "The Astra Telepathica will not care about your motivations," he said after a long pause. "They will accept any psyker who presents themselves willingly. Volunteers are rare enough that they do not question the underlying reasons. You understand what this means? You understand that service to the Astronomican is final." "I understand," I lied. I did not understand. Not truly. I knew it would be difficult. I knew it would be dangerous. But I imagined something like our work in the astropathic choir, only more intense, more demanding. I imagined serving for years, perhaps, providing my psychic strength to fuel the light, then being rotated out when my power waned. I imagined surviving and eventually returning to Verdan Prime, to these comfortable chambers, to my sister, who would be cured by then. These were the fantasies of ignorance. They sustained me through what came next. Uldrich processed my request through official channels. Within 2 days, a representative from the Adeptus Astra Telepathica arrived on Verdan Prime. She was a severe woman in the black robes of her order, her face marked with the tattoos that identified her rank and function. She interviewed me briefly, asking about my training, my strength, my willingness to serve. When I confirmed my volunteer status, she gave me a look I did not understand at the time. Pity mixed with something else. Respect, perhaps, or sadness. She approved my transfer immediately. I had 3 days to prepare. I gave my possessions to Katya, everything except the clothes I would wear for the journey. I wrote letters to the few friends I had made in the choir, though I could not tell them the truth. I told them I had been called to higher service, that I was honored by the opportunity, that they should remember me as one who served faithfully. The night before my departure, Katya came to my chambers. She had removed the dampening circlet despite the pain it caused her. She wanted to be fully present for our final conversation. "I will never forgive you for this," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I will carry the weight of what you have done for the rest of my life. Every day I live will be a reminder that you died so I could continue. Then live well." I replied, "Live for both of us. Find joy. Find purpose. Make my sacrifice meaningful by refusing to waste what I have given you." We embraced. I felt her psychic presence, unstable and crackling with barely controlled energy, brush against mine. In that moment of connection, I felt her love and her anguish, and her desperate wish that I would change my mind. I did not change my mind. The Astra Telepathica transport arrived at dawn. It was a small void craft, angular and black, marked with the symbols of their order. I boarded with 4 other psykers who had been summoned from elsewhere on Verdan Prime. None of them were volunteers. They were conscripts, psykers whose power had been deemed suitable for Astronomican service. They went in chains. I walked freely. As the transport lifted from the landing pad, I looked down at the spire. Katya stood on one of the observation platforms, a tiny figure growing smaller as we ascended. She raised one hand in farewell. I raised mine in return. Then the clouds swallowed the view. and Verdan Prime disappeared beneath us. The pilot, a servitor hardwired into the craft's systems, flew us to the system's edge where a black ship waited in the outer dark. The black ships are legend among psykers, prison vessels that harvest us from 1,000 worlds and transport us to Terra for sanctioning or other purposes. Their holds are said to be nightmares, packed with unsanctioned psykers whose powers run wild, creating miniature hells in the ship's depths. Our transport docked with the black ship Devout Suffering. I was escorted through corridors of dark metal to a processing chamber, where Astra Telepathica officials logged my identity and purpose. When I stated I was a volunteer, the official processing me paused, then made a notation on his data slate. "Volunteer," he repeated, his voice flat. "Destination: Astronomican choir. Status: willing sacrifice. May the Emperor accept your service." There was no ceremony, no blessing, no acknowledgement of what I had chosen, just a notation in a ledger and directions to the section of the ship where I would spend the journey to Terra. As I was led away, I heard one of the officials speak quietly to another. "Another volunteer. What do you think drives them to it? Ignorance or faith?" came the reply. "I can never decide which is sadder." I was placed in a chamber with 2 other volunteers and 300 conscripted psykers. The conscripts were in various states of control and awareness. Some raged against their chains. Some wept. Some had retreated into catatonia, their minds unable to process their fate. The volunteers were different. We were calm, or appeared so, each of us carrying our private reasons for choosing this path. The black ship entered the warp, and our journey to Terra began. I had volunteered to save my sister. The expression on the Astra Telepathica official's face when accepting my service made sense now. It was not pity. It was recognition. She had seen volunteers before. She knew what we faced. She knew that our choice, made freely, made our fate somehow worse than those who were forced. I did not understand this yet. I would learn. The Devout Suffering was a cathedral of despair wrapped in adamantium and void shields. I learned its architecture through necessity, mapping the sections where volunteers were permitted to move, understanding the boundaries beyond which only crew and Astra Telepathica officials ventured. The ship was vast, kilometers long, its interior a labyrinth of corridors and chambers designed to contain the most dangerous cargo in the Imperium. Unsanctioned psykers, whose powers could tear holes in reality. We volunteers occupied a section near the ship's center, behind triple-layered psychic baffles and hull plating inscribed with words older than my world. The accommodations were austere but not cruel. We had individual cells barely large enough for a cot and a small desk. We were fed twice daily, nutrient paste that tasted of nothing but fulfilled its function. We were permitted to gather in a common area under supervision, allowed to speak, to read approved texts, to maintain some semblance of personhood before we reached Terra. The conscripted psykers occupied the holds below us. I felt them constantly, their psychic presence pressing against the ship's defenses like animals clawing at cage bars. Their fear and rage and madness created a background radiation of psychic noise that made sleep difficult and meditation nearly impossible. Some were children who had just manifested. Some were adults who had hidden their abilities for years before discovery. All were terrified. All were doomed. On the second day of our journey, I met the other volunteers. There were only 2 besides myself aboard this ship. The Astra Telepathica official had told us this was unusual. Most black ships carried perhaps 1 volunteer among hundreds or thousands of conscripts. 3 on a single voyage was extraordinary. The first was a woman named Yevena from a shrine world called Ophelia 7th. She was perhaps 40 years old, her face lined with the premature aging that affects all sanctioned psykers. She wore the robes of an ordained priestess, though the symbols of her order had been removed when she volunteered. She spoke of her decision with absolute conviction. I served the Emperor in the priesthood for 20 years, she told us during our first gathering in the common area. I tended his shrines, led his faithful in prayer, used my gifts to root out heresy and corruption. But always, I knew there was a higher calling. The Astronomican is his will made manifest. To serve it directly, to become part of the light that guides humanity through darkness. This is the ultimate expression of faith. Her certainty was absolute, untroubled by doubt. She had volunteered out of genuine religious fervor, believing she was ascending to a sacred duty. I envied her conviction, even as I recognized it as a comfortable delusion. She did not volunteer to save anyone. She volunteered because she believed the propaganda, because her faith demanded she see beauty in what was likely horror. The second volunteer was a man named Dmitri from a forge world in the Segmentum Solar. He was young, perhaps 25, his body already showing the minor augmentations common to those raised among the Adeptus Mechanicus. He had studied as a tech priest before his psychic abilities manifested, an occurrence rare among those who serve the machine god but not impossible. His reasons for volunteering were more complex. I lost control, he explained, his augmented voice carrying a slight mechanical timbre. During a routine maintenance ritual, I experienced a psychic surge. 3 servitors were destroyed. 2 tech priests were injured. My master judged me a liability to the forge. I could have been sanctioned for execution, but I was offered an alternative. Volunteer for the Astronomican, or face purging. I chose to serve. His choice was not truly a choice. He had been given the illusion of agency to make his conscription more palatable. He volunteered to avoid execution, making him something between a true volunteer and a conscript. His eyes held anger, carefully controlled, directed at a fate he had not truly chosen. And then there was me. When they asked why I volunteered, I told them the truth. There seemed little point in deception. My sister was destabilizing. Her soul binding was failing. She would have been executed. I took her place. Yevena reached across the table and placed her hand on mine. The Emperor recognizes sacrifice made in love. Your service will be blessed. Dmitri said nothing, but his expression softened slightly. Perhaps he saw in my choice a nobility his own lacked. Perhaps he simply recognized a fellow prisoner trying to find meaning in imprisonment. The black ship crew treated us with a strange mixture of deference and distance. They would bow slightly when we passed in corridors, acknowledging our volunteer status with a respect they did not show the conscripts. But they would not meet our eyes. They would not speak to us beyond necessary instructions. We were already dead to them, ghosts walking through the ship's halls, deserving of respect but not connection. On the 5th day, I asked one of the guards why volunteers were treated differently. He was an older man, scarred and weathered, wearing the black carapace armor of the Astra Telepathica's security forces. He considered my question for a long moment before answering. "The conscripts are victims," he said finally. "They rail against fate because fate was imposed upon them. They are innocent in the way all prisoners are innocent, regardless of their guilt. But you volunteers chose this. You walked into damnation with open eyes. That makes you either saints or fools, and we are not qualified to judge which. So we show respect and keep our distance." "Which do you think we are?" I asked. "Saints or fools?" He looked at me directly then, his eyes holding a weariness that spoke of decades spent shepherding psykers to their fates. "Does it matter? The Astronomican burns both the same." The journey through the warp lasted 17 days. Time moved strangely in the immaterium, the ship's chronometers our only anchor to objective reality. I spent my days in meditation, attempting to strengthen my psychic disciplines, preparing myself for what I imagined lay ahead. I spent my nights listening to the psychic screaming of the conscripts below, their terror seeping through the ship's wards like water through cracked stone. On the 9th day, something breached the Geller field. For 3 minutes and 40 seconds, the immaterium touched the ship's interior. I felt it as pressure, as wrongness, as voices speaking in languages that predated human thought. The conscripts below went mad. Their combined psychic shrieking created a feedback loop that killed 17 of them and left dozens more brain-dead. The ship's psykers and priests worked frantically to restore the Geller field's integrity while armed security moved through the holds, executing those conscripts too damaged or too dangerous to contain. We volunteers were unaffected, our cells located behind the strongest defenses. But the incident reminded us of our fundamental nature. We were weapons, barely controlled, always one moment from catastrophic failure. The Imperium's treatment of psykers was not cruelty. It was necessity. On the 17th day, we translated back into real space. The Vox system announced our arrival in the Sol system, Holy Terra, humanity's cradle and throne. We were summoned to observation ports to witness our approach. Nothing could have prepared me for Terra. The planet hung in the void like a diseased pearl, its surface obscured by layers of industrial pollution and atmospheric processing stations. Orbital plates ringed it, vast constructions housing billions, artificial continents suspended in the sky. Ships beyond counting moved between the plates and the surface, a constant flow of pilgrims and resources and the Imperium's endless bureaucratic machinery. And dominating the southern hemisphere, visible even from orbit, the Imperial Palace. It was not a building but a mountain range, continents of architecture built over millennia, reaching toward the void with spires that pierced the atmosphere. Somewhere within that impossible structure sat the Golden Throne and the Emperor himself, dying but undying, maintaining the Astronomican through willpower and sacrifice and 10,000 years of agony. We descended through the orbital plates, through atmosphere thick with incense and industrial effluent, toward a landing zone marked with the symbols of the Astra Telepathica. The conscripts were unloaded first, herded into massive transport vehicles that would take them to sanctioning facilities or other destinations. We volunteers were escorted separately, treated with ceremony, if not kindness. A ground transport brought us to the Astra Telepathica fortress, a structure built into the palace's outer walls. We passed through checkpoints manned by palace guards, their armor golden, their weapons aimed at us despite our volunteer status. Every psyker is a threat on Terra. Every psyker is watched. The processing facility was clinical and efficient. We were stripped, scrubbed with chemical solutions that burned the skin, examined by apothecaries who tested our physical fitness and psychic strength. Blood was drawn, gene samples catalogued, our every measurable quality recorded in data slates that would follow us through whatever remained of our lives. Yevena submitted to the examinations with prayer on her lips. Dmitri endured them with stoic silence. I found myself numb, moving through the procedures mechanically, my mind unable to fully process that I was on Terra, that I was being prepared for service in the Astronomican. After processing, we were led deeper into the palace complex, through corridors that had stood for 10,000 years, past chambers whose purposes we could not guess. We saw chapter serfs hurrying about mysterious errands. We saw Adeptus Mechanicus tech priests performing maintenance on systems that hummed with barely contained power. We saw distances that should not exist within any structure, spaces that defied architectural logic. And then we entered the hollow mountain. It appeared first as a wall of black stone, featureless and absolute. As we approached, a portal irised open, revealing depths that descended into Terra's crust and beyond. The air that flowed from the opening was hot and dry, carrying the scent of incense and something else, something like burning metal and ozone, and beneath it all, a smell like charred meat. Our escort, a senior member of the Astra Telepathica whose robes were marked with symbols of rank I did not recognize, spoke for the first time since we left the transport. Beyond this threshold lies the choir. You have volunteered for humanity's most essential service. The Astronomican guides 10,000 ships daily through the warp. It enables the Imperium's survival. Without it, we fragment and die. You will become part of this great work. He paused, studying each of us in turn. When his gaze reached me, I saw something flicker in his expression. Recognition, perhaps, or memory. You will serve for as long as your strength endures. The Emperor himself will witness your sacrifice. There is no higher honor. There is no greater purpose. Everything he said was true. Everything he said was a lie of omission. The honor was real. The purpose was genuine. But he did not mention the cost, the duration, the ultimate fate of those who served. We descended into the hollow mountain. The passage wound downward through stone, the walls lined with wards and prayers inscribed in languages I did not recognize. The temperature increased with each level. The air grew thicker. My psychic senses, normally carefully controlled, began to feel pressure from below, a weight of accumulated power that built like water behind a dam. And then I felt it for the first time. The Astronomican, not as light but as presence, as purpose incarnate, as a psychic scream of such magnitude that it could be felt across the galaxy. It was beautiful. It was terrible. It was calling, and we were descending toward it, and there would be no return. The preparation chambers existed in a space between the hollow mountain's entrance and the choir itself, a transitional realm where volunteers and conscripts were transformed from individuals into components of the Astronomican's machinery. We were led through corridors carved from bedrock, the stone walls sweating condensation despite the dry heat, past chambers whose purposes I could only guess at. Through reinforced observation ports, I glimpsed psykers strapped to machines, their bodies convulsing as electrodes stimulated specific neural pathways. I saw meditation cells where solitary figures sat in positions of prayer or agony, impossible to distinguish which. I saw operating theaters where apothecaries worked on subjects whose screaming was audible even through soundproofed glass. Our group of 3 volunteers was separated upon arrival. Yevena was taken to chambers reserved for those serving through faith. Dmitri went to facilities designed for psykers with technical training. I was assigned to general preparation, the path for those who volunteered for personal rather than ideological reasons. We were told we would not see each other again until we took our positions in the choir. This was presented as logistical necessity. I suspect it was intentional isolation, breaking whatever bonds we had formed during transit. My cell was 3 meters by 4, carved from the mountain's living rock. A narrow cot, a small desk with a data slate containing approved texts, a basin for washing, a waste reclamation unit. No windows, no natural light, only luminators that never fully dimmed. The walls were inscribed with psychic wards so dense they created a pressure I felt constantly against my mind, like living in a room where the air was slightly too thick to breathe comfortably. On the first day, I was visited by choirmaster Secundus Thalen, an ancient psyker whose body had been extensively augmented to extend his life beyond natural limits. His left arm was mechanical, his right eye replaced with an augmentic that glowed with a dull red light. His skin was the color of old parchment, stretched tight over bones that seemed too prominent. He moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was failing but whose will refused to acknowledge it. "You volunteered," he said, consulting a data slate. "For your sister. Familial obligation. Not faith, not redemption, not patriotic fervor. Just love." He looked up from the slate, his human eye studying me with an intensity his augmentic could not match. "Do you understand what you have chosen?" "Service to the Astronomican," I replied, using the formal language. "Providing my psychic strength to maintain the light that guides the Imperium." Technically accurate, functionally misleading. He set down the data slate and clasped his hands behind his back. "The Astronomican is not a mechanism you feed with energy like coals into a furnace. It is not a spell you maintain through concentration. It is a psychic beacon of such magnitude that it exists partially in both the materium and the immaterium simultaneously. Maintaining it requires psykers to bridge that gap, to become conduits through which power flows. You will not feed the light, You will become part of it, and it will consume you. I said nothing. What response was there? I had already volunteered. The choice was made. Your training begins immediately, Thalen continued. You have 3 months to prepare your mind and body for the choir. This preparation is not optional. Without it, you would die within minutes of joining the link. With it, you may survive weeks, perhaps months if your strength is exceptional. The training is brutal by necessity. Many do not survive it. Those who fail are reassigned to other duties within the Astra Telepathica, or, if their failure is catastrophic, granted the Emperor's mercy. He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. You volunteered to save your sister. Remember that in the days ahead, when the pain becomes unbearable, when your mind begs for release, remember why you are here. It is the only anchor that will keep you sane. The training began within the hour. I was taken to a meditation chamber where 2 other psychers already sat in positions of enforced concentration, their bodies held rigid by psychic discipline. An instructor, a woman whose face was marked with burn scars from poorly controlled psychic discharge, gestured for me to take the 3rd position. Open your mind, she commanded. Not gently, not with the careful control you were taught. Rip it open. Expose your soul to the warp without reservation. This went against every instinct, every lesson I had learned during sanctioning. Psychers who opened their minds completely invited possession, allowed demons to enter and use them as doorways into reality. It was the cardinal sin, the act that justified our persecution and control. Do it, the instructor said, or I will do it for you, and that will be considerably more painful. I hesitated. She raised her hand, and I felt psychic pressure building around her, a gathering of power that promised to shatter my defenses through force. I opened my mind. The warp rushed in like water through a broken dam. I felt the immaterium's touch, its infinite possibility and infinite horror pressing against my consciousness. Whispers in languages I did not speak but somehow understood offered power, knowledge, pleasure, freedom. Shapes moved in the periphery of my psychic vision. Things that were not quite present but not quite absent. Predators circling wounded prey. Hold it, the instructor commanded. Do not close yourself. Do not resist. Learn to exist in this state without succumbing. Minutes passed like hours. The whispers grew more insistent, more specific. They knew my name, knew my sister, knew why I had volunteered. They offered to return me to her, to give me the power to save her properly, to remake the choice I had made. All I had to do was accept their gifts, open myself just a little further, let them in. Close, the instructor said finally, and I slammed my mental defenses back into place with desperate speed. The warp receded. The whispers faded. I was alone in my skull again, shaking and drenched in sweat. You lasted 4 minutes and 13 seconds, the instructor said. Adequate for a first attempt. Tomorrow, you will do 6 minutes. By the end of the month, you will do 30. By the end of preparation, you will exist in that state for hours without faltering. This was the first discipline, opening the mind while maintaining the self, learning to withstand the warp's pressure without succumbing to corruption or madness. We practiced twice daily, the duration increasing gradually, the strain accumulating. 3 psychers in my training group failed. 1 accepted the whisper's offers and was immediately executed by the instructor, a bolt of psychic force that stopped his heart before the demon could fully manifest. The other 2 simply broke, their minds fragmenting under the strain. They were removed, and I never saw them again. The second discipline was synchronization. We were taught to link our minds with other psychers, to merge our consciousness into a gestalt without losing our individual identity. This was different from the telepathic communication I had practiced in the astropathic choir. This was deeper, more intimate, a joining that made privacy impossible. I was paired with other volunteers and conscripts in groups of 10, 20, 50. We would sit in circles and open our minds to each other, feeling the boundaries between selves dissolve and reform. I experienced memories that were not mine, felt emotions that belonged to strangers, thought thoughts in patterns my brain had never generated. The first time, I emerged from the link unable to remember my own name for several minutes, lost in the accumulated identity of the group. "This is necessary," our instructor explained during one session. "The choir operates as a single entity, thousands of minds linked in purpose. You must learn to be both individual and collective simultaneously. Those who cannot maintain this balance either lose themselves entirely in the gestalt or remain isolated, unable to contribute. Both outcomes are fatal." The training intensified. We linked in larger groups, maintaining the connection for longer periods. I learned to recognize the sensation of other minds brushing against mine, learned to contribute my strength to the whole while holding enough back to preserve my sense of self. But the boundary was precarious, and I felt myself changing with each session, becoming something that was not quite the person who had volunteered. The third discipline was endurance. Our bodies were subjected to stress that simulated what we would experience in the choir. We were placed in chambers where the temperature exceeded 50 degrees Celsius. We were deprived of sleep for days at a time. We were subjected to psychic pressure that felt like having our skulls slowly compressed. We were fed stimulants that kept us conscious beyond the body's natural limits, then sedatives that forced unconsciousness despite our best efforts to resist. "The choir is suffering," our endurance instructor told us. A man whose body had been rebuilt so many times that more of him was augmentic than organic. Continuous, unrelenting suffering. Your body will scream for relief. Your mind will beg for unconsciousness. The light does not care. It burns constantly, and you will burn with it until nothing remains. This training teaches you to suffer without breaking, to endure without hope of respite. I learned to exist in agony, learned to function while every nerve fired pain signals, learned to maintain psychic discipline while my body betrayed me with exhaustion and damage. 2 more psykers in my group died during endurance training, their hearts giving out under the strain. Their bodies were removed efficiently, their names added to roles I would never see. We continued without pause. Between training sessions, I studied. The data slate in my cell contained texts about the Astronomican's history, its function, its necessity. I learned that it had been established during the Great Crusade, a psychic beacon to guide the Emperor's fleets across the galaxy. I learned that it was powered initially by the Emperor himself. His psychic might sufficient to maintain it alone. I learned that after his internment in the Golden Throne following the Horus Heresy, the burden had been shared by the choir, thousands of psykers lending their strength to maintain what he could no longer sustain fully. I learned that the choir consumed approximately 10,000 psykers daily. The number was stated matter-of-factly, without context or explanation. 10,000 souls burned to ash every single day, for 10,000 years. The mathematics were staggering. The Astronomican had consumed trillions of psykers since its inception. It would consume trillions more before the Imperium finally fell. I learned that volunteers were rare. Perhaps 1 in every 100,000 psykers who served the choir came willingly. The rest were conscripted, pressed into service by necessity. The texts praised volunteers with language that felt hollow. They spoke of sacrifice and nobility and willing martyrdom. They did not explain why, if service was so glorious, so few chose it freely. On my 40th day of preparation, I was permitted visitors from outside the training program. I expected none, being far from home and knowing no one on Terra. But Yevena came to my cell, escorted by guards who waited outside while we spoke. She looked aged, though only 40 days had passed. Her hair had gone entirely white. Her skin held the translucent quality of someone whose body was consuming itself. But her eyes burned with undiminished conviction. "Have you maintained your faith?" she asked immediately. Settling onto the edge of my cot, with visible relief at being permitted to sit. "I never had the kind of faith you mean," I replied honestly. Then you will not survive, she said with certainty. Those who serve without faith, who burn without purpose beyond duty, they break quickly. The light demands more than obedience. It demands willing sacrifice. And you still believe? After 40 days of this preparation, after learning what awaits us, you still think this is holy? Her smile was beatific, untouched by doubt. More than ever, every moment of pain proves my devotion. Every hour of suffering brings me closer to the Emperor. When I join the choir, when I burn in the light, I will finally transcend this mortal shell and become one with his divine purpose. I envied her delusion. She had constructed a narrative that made horror into glory, that transformed suffering into sacrament. She would burn believing herself blessed. I would burn knowing I was fuel. On the 60th day, I encountered Dmitri in one of the meditation chambers. He was alone, sitting in the darkness, his augmentic implants gleaming dully in the low light. I sat beside him without speaking, and we remained in silence for several minutes before he finally spoke. I have been thinking about choice, he said quietly. About whether my volunteering was genuine or simply a more elaborate form of conscription. I was told I would die if I did not volunteer. Is that truly a choice? Can we claim agency when the alternative is execution? Does it matter? I asked. We are here regardless of how we arrived. It matters, he insisted. Those who were forced can hate their fate without guilt. They are victims, blameless. But if I chose, even under duress, then I am complicit in my own destruction. And I do not know which is worse, to be a victim or to be complicit. I had no answer for him. My own choice had been clearer, made without direct threat, but it too carried the weight of responsibility. I had volunteered, and whatever came next would be something I had chosen. On the 80th day, we were shown the choir for the first time. Not to join it, not yet, but to observe and understand. We were taken to an observation gallery carved into the mountain stone, protected by psychic baffles and reinforced glass. Below us, stretching into depths that seemed impossible, the choir sang. Thousands of psychers sat in concentric circles, their bodies held in place by harnesses and medical equipment. Their eyes were closed or unseeing. Their mouths moved in silent prayer or screaming. Golden light emanated from them, not physically, but psychically, a radiance visible only to those with warp sight. The light gathered and concentrated, flowing upward through architecture that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, directed and shaped by mechanisms both technological and psychic. And at the center, in the innermost circle, I saw the core. 24 figures who barely resembled humans anymore, their bodies consumed by the light, their forms more energy than matter. They blazed like stars, and the pain they experienced was visible even from this distance. A suffering so absolute, it transcended physical reality. This is what awaits you, Choirmaster Thalen said, standing beside me in the gallery. You will begin in the outer circles, where the light's intensity is manageable. If you survive, you will be moved inward, closer to the center, where you will burn brighter and faster. The truly strong may reach the core, where you will serve for hours before your dissolution becomes complete. How long do most survive? I asked, my voice steady despite the horror unfolding below. In the outer choir, weeks or months. In the middle choir, days or weeks. In the inner choir, hours or days. In the core, minutes or hours. There is no standard measure. Some burn out almost immediately. Others persist beyond all expectation. Your strength will determine your duration. And after? I asked, though I knew the answer. After, you are ash. Your body is recycled. Your gene seed harvested if you possess it. your name entered in the ledger of sacrifice. And another psyker takes your place, and the choir continues, and the light never falters. On the 90th day, we underwent the final preparation, the branding. We were brought to a chamber where a master of the choir waited, surrounded by instruments that glowed with psychic resonance. One by one, we were called forward. When my turn came, I knelt before the master. He placed his hands on my head, and I felt psychic energy flow into me, not gently, but like molten metal poured directly into my soul. It seared and marked and bound me to the choir in ways I could not fully understand. When he finished, I could feel the Astronomican constantly, a presence at the edge of my consciousness that called and pulled and demanded. "You are bound now," the master said. "Bound to the light, bound to service, bound to the choir until your strength fails and you are consumed. There is no escape from this binding. No distance is sufficient to break it. You will serve until you burn to nothing, and even then, fragments of you may linger in the light, echoes of service that never ends." On the 91st day, we were given our final meal as individuals. Not nutrient-paced, but actual food, prepared with care, if not artistry. Bread and protein and vegetables grown in the palace's vast hydroponic gardens. We ate in silence, the three of us who had volunteered together, reunited briefly before the end. Yevena prayed over her food. Dmitri ate mechanically, his augmentic systems processing nutrients with measured efficiency. I tried to savor each bite, knowing it would be my last meal consumed with anything resembling normalcy. "Tomorrow we join the choir," Yevena said when we finished. "Tomorrow we become the light. Tomorrow we burn," I thought but did not say. "Tomorrow I fulfill the choice I made to save my sister. Tomorrow I learn if the price was worth paying." I returned to my cell and lay on the narrow cot. I tried to sleep, but the binding pulled at me, the Astronomican's call growing stronger as the appointed hour approached. I thought of Katya, wondered if she was still alive, if my sacrifice had given her time to stabilize, if she would live and never know what I had endured for her survival. The question that had haunted Dmitri returned to me in the darkness. Did my choice matter? Was volunteering meaningfully different from conscription? I had walked into this willingly. But was that nobility, or simply a more elaborate form of victimhood? I had no answer. The morning came regardless. The descent into the choir began in darkness. We were led from our preparation cells in the hours before dawn, though day and night held no meaning this deep within the hollow mountain. The corridors stretched downward at angles that defied comfortable geometry, the walls pressing closer with each level, the air growing thick with incense and the psychic pressure of accumulated power. I walked between Yevena and Dmitri, the three of us bound together by shared fate if nothing else. Behind us came 24 conscripted psykers, their faces blank with terror or resignation or the sedatives they had been given to ensure compliance. We passed through checkpoints guarded by Sisters of Silence, the blank-souled anti-psykers, whose very presence created zones of psychic nullification. Walking near them felt like suffocation, like having a vital sense suddenly excised. They watched us with expressions that might have been pity or contempt, impossible to distinguish. We represented everything they existed to control, yet we were walking willingly into the service they enforced upon others. The choir chamber revealed itself gradually, first as golden light bleeding through sealed doorways, then as sound that was not quite sound, a vibration felt in bones and teeth and the spaces between thoughts. Finally, as we passed through the final threshold, as architecture that existed in dimensions beyond the physical, the chamber was vast beyond measurement. Concentric circles descended into depths that should have been impossible given Terra's geology. But this was the hollow mountain, a space carved as much by psychic force as by physical labor. Each circle held hundreds of positions, each position occupied by a psyker, held in place by harnesses of dark metal inscribed with wards. Medical equipment surrounded each figure, tubes and cables monitoring vital signs, administering nutrients and stimulants and pain suppressors in carefully calculated doses. The light emanated from the center, from the core where the innermost psykers burned brightest. It was not illumination in any conventional sense. It existed primarily in the warp, a beacon visible across the galaxy to those with the sight to perceive it. But its radiance spilled into real space, creating a golden glow that suffused the chamber, casting shadows that moved independently of their sources. Attendants in the robes of the Astra Telepathica moved between the circles, tending to the psykers, replacing those who had burned out with fresh subjects, maintaining the machinery that supported the choir's function. They worked with practiced efficiency, neither rushed nor casual, performing duties they had repeated countless times. We were brought to the outer choir, the furthest ring from the center. The positions here were occupied by psykers in various states of service. Some appeared relatively intact, their bodies unmarked by visible damage, though their eyes held the 1,000-yard stare of those who had experienced horrors beyond articulation. Others showed signs of deterioration. Skin graying, hair whitening, bodies thinning as if being consumed from within. I was led to an empty position between two occupied ones. The psyker to my left was a young woman, perhaps 20 years old. Her body strapped into the harness with restraints that had worn grooves into her flesh. Her eyes were open but unseeing, her mouth moving in silent words. The psyker to my right was older, his body so wasted that bones were visible beneath skin that had taken on a translucent quality. He did not move at all. I realized with dull horror that he was dead, his body awaiting removal once the current rotation ended. Attendants secured me into the harness with practiced motions. The restraints locked around my wrists, ankles, torso, and neck, holding me in a position that would have been uncomfortable if comfort still mattered. Medical equipment was attached, needles sliding into veins, sensors adhering to skin, a breathing apparatus positioned near my face should my autonomic functions fail. Choir Master Thalen appeared before me, his augmentic eye glowing brighter in the golden light. You will now join the link. Do not resist. Resistance is painful and ultimately futile. Open your mind as you were trained. The choir will embrace you, and you will become part of the light. He moved to the next position, delivering the same instructions to Dmitri. Down the line, Yevgena's voice rose in prayer, the words lost in the chamber's ambient sound, but her devotion clear. Then the connection began. I felt it first as pressure, as if the air around me had suddenly become denser. Then as presence, the minds of the other psykers in the choir reaching toward mine. Not aggressively, but inevitably, like water filling a void. I had been trained for this, had practiced in groups of 50, but nothing had prepared me for the scale. Not 50 minds, but thousands, all pressing against my consciousness simultaneously. I opened myself as instructed, dropping the mental barriers that preserved my sense of self. The choir flooded in. I was no longer Alexei Volnov. I was a component of something vast and terrible and necessary. My individuality dissolved into the collective, my thoughts becoming merely threads in a tapestry woven from thousands of consciousness. And then I felt the Astronomican itself. The light was not gentle. It was not the warm embrace of the Emperor's love that propaganda described. It was burning, searing, an immolation that consumed everything it touched. The light flowed through the choir, through me, using our combined psychic strength as fuel and conduit. I felt it reaching out across the galaxy, felt ships in the warp using it for navigation, felt navigators across the Imperium turning their third eyes toward it and finding salvation in its guidance. The purpose was real. The necessity was undeniable. Without the light, the Imperium would fragment, its worlds isolated in the darkness, unable to maintain the unity required for survival. We were providing something essential, something that enabled trillions of humans to live and die and continue the endless struggle against extinction. But the cost was absolute. I felt my psychic strength draining like blood from a severed artery. I felt my life force being consumed, converted into the energy that fueled the light. My body began to age in accelerated time, cells dying and failing to regenerate, organs straining under load they were never designed to bear. Pain blossomed through every nerve, a suffering so complete it transcended physical sensation and became something purely experiential. Time lost meaning. The rotation was scheduled for 8 hours, but I experienced it as years, decades, centuries of burning in the light, of being consumed in service to a purpose I could not refuse. I tried to scream but had no control over my body. I tried to retreat into unconsciousness, but the stimulants kept me aware, forced me to experience every moment of my dissolution. Through the collective consciousness of the choir, I felt others dying. A psyker 3 circles inward burned out completely, his mind shattering like glass under pressure. His death rippled through the link, a moment of absence that was immediately filled as a replacement was brought forward and connected. The choir never faltered. One voice might fail, but thousands remained, and the light continued uninterrupted. I felt the young woman to my left beginning to break. Her mind was fracturing, unable to withstand the strain. I felt her terror, her desperate attempts to hold herself together, her ultimate failure as coherent thought dissolved into static. Yet her body continued to burn, continued to fuel the light, even after the person she had been ceased to exist. I felt the dead psyker to my right still connected to the link. His body might have failed, but something of his psychic imprint remained, trapped in the machinery, forced to continue serving even beyond death. The horror of this realization cut through the pain, a moment of clarity in the burning. And beneath it all, I felt something else. Whispers in the light. Voices that were not the choir. The daemons that constantly probed the Astronomican, seeking weaknesses, looking for psykers whose minds had been sufficiently damaged to accept corruption. They offered relief, offered power, offered anything that might seduce a broken soul into opening itself to the warp's true horrors. I heard my name in those whispers, heard promises that I could return to Katya, that I could save her properly, that I could undo my choice. All lies. But in the extremity of suffering, lies became tempting. I felt other psykers in the choir accepting the whispers, felt their corruption beginning, felt the immediate response as custodians moved through the circles, identifying and executing the compromised before their taint could spread. A psyker 7 positions to my left was killed, a lance of psychic force stopping his heart instantly. The custodian moved on without pause, seeking other signs of corruption, maintaining the choir's purity through ruthless vigilance. We burned, and they watched, and any weakness was purged with absolute efficiency. Through the agony, through the dissolution of self, I held to one thought: Katya, my sister, alive because I burned. The image of her face became my anchor, the reason that kept me from accepting the whisper's promises. I would burn for her. I would suffer for her. I would endure this hell for as long as my strength lasted, because her life was worth this price. But doubt crept in even as I clung to purpose. Was any life worth this suffering? Could I claim nobility in a choice that led to such horror? Would Katya want this for me if she knew the truth? The rotation continued. I felt my body failing in stages, hair falling out in clumps, skin developing lesions that wept fluid, internal organs beginning to shut down, kept functional only by the medical equipment and the stimulants pumping through my veins. I was being consumed, burned as fuel, and there was no escape, no relief, no hope of anything but eventual complete dissolution. And then, after an eternity compressed into 8 hours, the rotation ended. The connection was severed, the link dissolved. I slammed back into individual consciousness with force that felt like physical impact. I was Alexei again, separate, alone in my skull, and the sudden isolation was almost as traumatic as the joining had been. My body hung limp in the harness, every muscle spasming with exhaustion and damage. The attendants moved through the circles, removing the dead, stabilizing the living, preparing everyone for the brief respite before the next rotation. I was unstrapped and carried to a recovery chamber, my legs unable to support weight, my vision blurred and darkening at the edges. The recovery chamber was lined with cots where psychers lay in various states of consciousness. Medical servitors moved between them, administering treatment, replacing fluids, assessing damage. I was placed on a cot and immediately connected to nutrient feeds and regenerative stimulants. The pain did not stop but transformed, became something more manageable, merely unbearable rather than impossible. Yevena was brought in and placed on the cot beside mine. Her white hair had become brittle and had fallen out in patches. Her skin bore burns that seemed to originate from within, but her eyes, when they focused on me, still burned with conviction. "Glory," she whispered, her voice raw. "Glory to the Emperor. We serve. We burn. We are blessed." Dmitri was carried in unconscious, his augmentic systems sparking and damaged. He had survived, but at what cost I could not determine. Around the chamber, 30 empty cots testified to those who had not survived their first rotation. 30 psychers who had burned out completely in 8 hours, their bodies removed for processing, their names added to ledgers, their absence filled by the constant supply of fresh subjects. A medicae approached my cot, checking readouts from the equipment attached to me. "You survived your first rotation with acceptable losses," she stated clinically. "Cellular degradation is within predicted parameters. Psychic reserves depleted to 43% of baseline but recovering. You will be ready for second rotation in 16 hours. 16 hours. I would have 16 hours to recover from 8 hours of burning before being thrown back into the light. The mathematics of attrition were clear. Eventually, the damage would accumulate faster than recovery could repair it. Eventually, my reserves would deplete to nothing. Eventually, I would join the 30 who had already failed. I closed my eyes, trying to rest, but the light remained visible even through closed lids, burned into my psychic vision. The Astronomican called constantly now, the binding pulling at me, demanding I return to service. Sleep was impossible. Rest was meaningless. I existed in a liminal state between rotations, neither recovering nor serving, merely persisting until the next burning began. Katya's face appeared in my mind, but I could no longer remember her features clearly. The light had already begun eroding my memories, consuming everything that was not essential to its function. I held to her name like a talisman, but I could feel even that slipping away, replaced by the golden burning that was now my only reality. The second rotation began before my body had truly recovered. 16 hours was not enough time to heal damage that had taken 8 hours to inflict, but the Astronomican did not care about recovery. It needed fuel constantly, and fuel was what we would be until nothing remained. They came for us in the recovery chamber, attendants moving efficiently between cots, disconnecting those who could still serve, marking those who could not. 3 psychers in my section were deemed too damaged to continue. They were carried away on gurneys, their fate unclear. Execution seemed most likely, though perhaps they would be assigned to lesser duties, if any function remained. I never learned which. They simply disappeared, replaced by fresh psychers, processed through the preparation chambers. The descent to the choir chamber was familiar now, though familiarity brought no comfort. My legs could barely support my weight. The attendants had to help me walk, their hands impersonal but not unkind. Around me, other psychers shuffled in various states of deterioration. Some moved under their own power, though slowly. Others were carried, their bodies too damaged for independent locomotion. Yevena walked beside me, though calling it walking was generous. She moved with the careful deliberation of someone whose body was betraying them with each step. Yet she prayed continuously, her lips moving in devotions to the Emperor, finding strength in faith that I could not access. Dmitri was carried on a gurney, still unconscious from the first rotation. His augmentic systems had suffered catastrophic failures during the burning. Tech priests had worked through the night to repair what they could, but much of his internal machinery remained offline. He would burn in the second rotation regardless, his consciousness irrelevant to the choir's function. The connection came easier this time. My mind knew what to expect, knew how to open itself to the link. The choir embraced me with terrible familiarity, and I dissolved once more into the collective consciousness. The light flowed through us, and the burning resumed, and time became meaningless again. But something was different. The dissolution of self came faster, more completely. The boundaries that had preserved my identity during the first rotation felt thinner, more permeable. I was not just contributing to the choir, but being absorbed by it, my individuality eroding with each moment of connection. I experienced memories that were not mine. A childhood on a feral world where survival required daily violence. Training in a schola progenium where faith was beaten into students with physical discipline. A family on an agri-world, faces I had never seen but somehow remembered. These were the memories of other choir members, bleeding through the link, contaminating my sense of self. My own memories continued to degrade. I tried to recall Verdan Prime but could only summon vague impressions. Gardens with trees whose names I no longer knew. A spire overlooking a city whose architecture had become generic in my recollection. And Katya, my sister, the reason for everything. Her face now a blur of features I could not quite resolve into coherent image. The panic this induced was brief, swallowed quickly by the choir's collective consciousness. Individual memory was irrelevant. Only the burning mattered. Only the light. Only the service that consumed us, moment by moment. The pain was worse in the second rotation. My body had not healed from the first burning, and now it was subjected to the same immolation. I felt organs failing in sequence, my kidneys shutting down, forcing the medical equipment to filter my blood artificially. My liver ceasing to process toxins, requiring chemical intervention. My lungs struggling to extract oxygen, supplemented by the breathing apparatus, forcing air into my chest, and my psychic reserves depleted faster. What had taken 8 hours to drain to 43% in the first rotation now dropped to 28%. The mathematics of deterioration were clear. Each rotation would leave me weaker. Each burning would consume more. Eventually, nothing would remain. Through the choir's collective awareness, I felt others reaching their limits. A psyker in the middle choir, having served for weeks, finally burned out completely. His death was not quiet. His mind shattered with psychic force that rippled through the link, a scream of agony that every connected consciousness experienced simultaneously. Then silence, absence, and the seamless replacement as another psyker was moved from the outer choir to fill the gap. I felt myself moving slightly inward as well. Not to the middle choir, not yet, but closer to the center. Those of us who survived the early rotations were gradually repositioned, placed where our remaining strength could burn more efficiently. The outer choir was for the newly inducted and the nearly depleted. Those who showed resilience were moved inward, closer to the light's source, where we would burn faster and brighter. The whispers intensified during the second rotation. The daemons probing the Astronomican had learned my psychic signature, knew my weaknesses. They no longer offered generic temptations but specific salvation. They showed me Katya, not as I remembered her, but as she was now. Safe, alive, working in the astropathic choir. They showed me her life continuing because I had volunteered, and then they offered to return me to her. "You have done enough," the whispers promised. "Your sacrifice has been accepted. Let us free you. Let us return you to her arms. You need only open yourself, accept our gift, and this suffering ends. Lies, of course. Accepting would mean possession, corruption, execution, and potential catastrophe if my taint spread through the choir. But in the extremity of suffering, lies became increasingly difficult to reject. The truth offered nothing but continued burning. The lies offered relief. I held firm, but I felt others in the choir accepting the whispers. I felt their corruption beginning, felt the moment when demon touched their souls, and began the transformation. The custodians responded with immediate violence. 15 psykers were executed during that rotation, their corruption detected and purged before it could spread. The deaths created gaps in the choir that were filled within minutes, the light never faltering despite the losses. When the second rotation ended, I was barely conscious. The attendants carried me to the recovery chamber and began the process of stabilization and treatment. I lay on the cot, unable to move, watching through blurred vision as medical servitors worked to keep me alive. My body had aged decades in 16 hours of burning. My hair had gone completely white and was falling out in clumps. My skin had developed a grayish tone. The healthy pigmentation burned away. My hands shook with palsy I could not control. When I caught my reflection in the polished surface of medical equipment, I did not recognize the face staring back. Yevena was placed on the cot beside mine again. She looked worse than I did, her body consumed to near skeletal thinness, her skin marked with burns and lesions. But she smiled when she saw me looking at her. "We serve," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Her faith remained absolute even as her body failed. I envied her conviction even more now. She had meaning in her suffering. I had only a name I could barely remember and a face that had dissolved into abstraction. Dmitri did not return to the recovery chamber. I learned later that he had died during the second rotation, his body giving out despite the medical support. Or perhaps he had been killed for corruption, his augmentic systems making him vulnerable to the Whisper's infiltration. I would never know which. He simply ceased to exist. Another name added to the ledgers. Another gap filled immediately. The third rotation came after only 12 hours of recovery. The intervals were shortening, or perhaps time was becoming more distorted. I could no longer trust my perception. I was carried to the choir chamber, unable to walk, and strapped into the harness with hands that had to be positioned manually because I could not grip anything. The connection was immediate. My mind having lost the ability to resist. I was the choir now, more than I was myself. The light burned through me, and I barely noticed the agony because pain had become my default state. Existence without suffering was now impossible to imagine. I moved inward during the third rotation. Not to the middle choir, but closer, positioned where my depleting strength could be used more efficiently. The light's intensity increased proportionally. I burned brighter and faster, contributing more but being consumed in accelerated time. Through the choir, I experienced the Astronomican's purpose directly. I felt a ship translating from the warp near Cadia, its navigator using the light to find safe passage. I felt a fleet assembling at Cipramundi, using the beacon to coordinate their movements across vast distances. I felt the Imperium functioning. Billions of humans, living and dying and continuing because we burned to light their way. The purpose was real. The necessity was absolute. And yet the cost was so terrible that knowing the trade was necessary provided no comfort whatsoever. The fourth rotation ended with me unable to remember my own name. Attendants carried me to recovery, and I lay on the cot trying to recall who I was, why I was here, what purpose drove me. The memories were gone, burned away as fuel for the light. I knew abstractly that I had volunteered, that I had made a choice, but the reasons were lost. There had been someone I loved, a sister, perhaps, Katya. The name meant something, but I could not recall the face or the relationship or why her survival had seemed worth this price. The 5th rotation began, and I was moved to the middle choir. The positions here were occupied by psykers in advanced states of deterioration. Bodies wasted to skeletal frames, eyes filmed with cataracts or burned out entirely, mouths frozen in silent screams. These were the ones who had served for weeks, who had burned longer than expected, whose strength had proven exceptional enough to warrant closer service. I would not serve here for weeks. I could feel my reserves depleting catastrophically. Days, perhaps. Hours, more likely. The light consumed me faster with each rotation, and I had nothing left to slow the burning. During the 6th rotation, I lost the ability to distinguish between rotations. Time collapsed into a single continuous burning. I was always in the choir, always connected, always dissolving into the light. The brief periods of recovery became dreams, hallucinations, moments that might have happened or might have been psychic echoes from other choir members. I saw Yevena die, or perhaps I experienced her death through the link. She burned out with a prayer on her lips, her faith sustaining her until the absolute end. Her final thought, transmitted through the choir, was gratitude. She died believing she had been blessed. I saw psykers around me fail in cascading sequence. The mortality rate in the middle choir was staggering. Dozens burning out daily, replaced immediately. The light never dimming despite the losses. I was surrounded by death, and death was coming for me. The 7th rotation broke something fundamental. My sense of self fragmented completely. I was no longer a person, but a collection of psychic energy held together by rapidly failing biological systems. My consciousness existed in pieces, scattered among the choir, each fragment experiencing different aspects of the burning. One fragment felt the pain. Another maintained the connection. A third whispered a name that might have been important. Katya, Katya, Katya. The fragments tried to reunify but failed, unable to overcome the damage the light had inflicted. During the 8th rotation, I was moved to the inner choir. The journey inward was carried out by servitors who handled my body like fragile cargo, which was accurate. My bones were visible through skin that had become translucent. My eyes no longer focused on physical reality. My breathing required constant mechanical assistance. The inner choir was where psykers came to die, not eventually but soon, within days or hours. The light here was so intense that physical bodies could not sustain it. We burned like candles, our substance converted directly into psychic radiance, our suffering transcending anything that could be called pain and becoming something purely experiential. I could see the core from here. 24 positions where psykers blazed like stars, their bodies more energy than matter, their consciousness merged so completely with the Astronomican that individual identity was impossible. That was the final destination. That was where I would burn to nothing. Soon. The inner choir existed in a state between physical reality and the immaterium. The golden light here was not metaphorical but tangible. A substance that could be felt against skin that no longer had functioning nerve endings. The air shimmered with psychic energy, and the boundaries between matter and warp grew thin enough to see through. I could perceive both realms simultaneously, watching servitors tend to my failing body while also seeing the daemons that circled beyond reality's membrane, waiting for any weakness they could exploit. My body was carried to a position in the 3rd ring from the center. This close to the core, there were no longer hundreds of psykers per ring, but dozens. 53 positions in my circle, each occupied by a psyker in the final stages of service. The psyker to my left had no lower jaw, the flesh and bone consumed by the light's intensity. Yet somehow he still lived, still burned, his psychic scream silent but deafening to those with the sense to hear it. The psyker to my right was a woman whose body had calcified, her skin hardening to a substance like stone, preserving her in the moment of her immolation. They strapped me into the harness with mechanical gentleness. The restraints were different here, reinforced with psychic dampeners to contain the energy we would generate. Medical equipment surrounded me in dense clusters, machines working frantically to keep biological systems functional beyond all reasonable limits. Nutrient feeds, waste processors, stimulant injectors, organ support systems, all humming with the effort of maintaining life in bodies that should have died weeks ago. Choir Master Thalen appeared before me one final time. His presence here was unusual. I understood dimly. The masters rarely descended this deep, but he studied me with his human eye, the augmentic one whirring as it recorded data I would never see. "You have served longer than anticipated," he said, his voice cutting through the ambient roar of the light. 3 weeks since your first rotation. Most volunteers fail within days. Your strength was exceptional. Or perhaps your purpose sustained you longer than physiology alone could manage. 3 weeks. The information felt meaningless. I had experienced centuries in the burning, or perhaps minutes. Time had lost all coherence. But 3 weeks meant Katya had lived 3 weeks longer. 3 weeks of life I had purchased with my dissolution. Was it enough? Would it ever be enough? "You will serve in the inner choir for as long as your body endures," Thalen continued. "Hours, most likely. Perhaps a day, if your resilience continues. Then you will be moved to the core for your final service. There is no recovery from the core. You will burn until nothing remains, and your sacrifice will be complete." He moved to the next position, delivering similar assessments to other psykers who could no longer process language. I hung in the harness, waiting for the rotation to begin, knowing this would be different from everything that came before. The connection, when it came, was not gradual but immediate and total. My consciousness was ripped from my body and flung into the choir's collective awareness with violence that would have shattered an unprepared mind. I was no longer myself in any meaningful sense. I was a component of the Astronomican, a fragment of will devoted entirely to maintaining the light that guided humanity through darkness. The intensity was beyond description. In the outer choir, I had felt the light as burning. In the middle choir, as immolation. Here in the inner choir, it was dissolution at the molecular level, my very atoms being converted into psychic energy. My body did not merely age, but was consumed in real time, substance becoming light, matter transcending into warp stuff. Through the choir's vast awareness, I perceived the Astronomican's true nature for the first time. It was not simply a beacon, but a scream, a psychic howl of such magnitude that it could be felt across the entire galaxy. Every psyker with even minor sensitivity knew the Astronomican's presence, felt it as pressure against their minds, as weight upon their souls. And we, the choir, were the throats through which that scream emerged, our suffering given cosmic scale and purpose. I felt the Emperor's presence differently here, not as consciousness or personality, but as will incarnate, as purpose so absolute it transcended identity. The golden throne above us, in the palace's heights, held something that had once been human but was no longer, something that had sacrificed its humanity for function. And we were doing the same, burning away everything that made us individuals to become components of his eternal vigil. The realization was both terrible and clarifying. The Emperor did not see us, could not see us. Whatever he had become no longer perceived individual psykers, but only their aggregated strength. The fuel we provided for the light, he maintained. We were not servants in any meaningful sense, but consumables, resources to be expended in humanity's defense. This truth should have broken me, should have made the suffering unbearable by robbing it of meaning. But instead, I found strange peace in it. The light did not care about my nobility or my sacrifice or my choice to volunteer. It simply burned, necessary and eternal, and I was burning with it. The purpose was real, even if the purpose did not acknowledge me. Through the choir, I experienced the Imperium at a scale impossible to comprehend during normal human existence. I felt billions of souls, their combined psychic presence creating a background roar that never ceased. I felt the ships navigating the warp, tiny points of order moving through chaos, guided by our light. I felt worlds burning in war, populations screaming as they died, the endless grinding horror of Imperial existence. And I understood that our suffering, catastrophic as it was merely one small component of the Imperium's total anguish. Trillions suffered and died daily to maintain humanity's survival. We in the choir were not unique in our torment, but simply more concentrated, our pain given focus and purpose, where others died in meaningless violence. I felt a psyker in the ring above me, closer to the core, finally burn out. His death was not like the others I had experienced through the link. This close to the center. Dissolution was not instantaneous but gradual, a slow fading as psychic energy was extracted until nothing remained but ash. I felt his final moments stretched across subjective eternity, experienced his last fragmentary thoughts as identity dissolved into the light. His name had been Mikhail. He had volunteered after his entire family died in an orc raid, seeking death with meaning after loss without purpose. He had served in the inner choir for 2 days, burning at the threshold of the core, and his final thought was relief. Not at ending his service, but at knowing his suffering had accomplished something, had kept the light burning for 2 more days, had guided ships safely through the warp for 48 hours. I would die with the same knowledge. My suffering had purpose, even if the purpose did not care about my suffering. The rotation continued without end. In the inner choir, there were no breaks, no recovery periods. We burned continuously until our bodies failed, then were replaced immediately. The concept of discrete rotations was meaningless here. There was only the eternal burning, the endless service, the light that never dimmed. I felt my body failing in cascading collapse. My heart stopped, restarted by medical equipment, stopped again, restarted again. My lungs ceased functioning entirely, breathing maintained by machines. My brain began dying from oxygen deprivation despite the mechanical respiration, neurons firing randomly as they expired. My psychic presence remained strong even as my biological substrate dissolved, the binding keeping me conscious and contributing long after physical death should have claimed me. Time became completely abstract. I might have served in the inner choir for hours or days or weeks. My perception was too damaged to measure duration. I existed in an eternal present of burning, each moment identical to the last, stretching toward infinity. Other psykers around me failed. I felt each death through the link, experienced their final dissolutions as if they were my own. A man who had been pressed into service, taken from a hive world and conscripted without choice, died screaming his hatred at the Imperium that had consumed him. A woman who had volunteered out of faith, like Yevena, died in ecstasy, believing until the end that she was blessed. A child who should never have been strong enough to reach the inner choir died without understanding what had happened, his mind too young to process his fate. And I died alongside them, piece by piece, system by system, until almost nothing remained. Then the call came. The core required a replacement. One of the innermost psykers had finally burned completely to ash, and a position had opened. I was selected. Not for any quality of nobility or strength, but simply because I was next in sequence, my position closest to the center in the pool of those about to fail. Servitors detached me from the inner choir's equipment and carried my body inward. The journey was brief in distance, infinite in significance. Each meter closer to the core increased the light's intensity exponentially. By the time we reached the innermost ring, my body was burning visibly, flames of psychic energy, consuming what little flesh remained. The core contained 24 positions arranged in a perfect circle around the central nexus. This was the Astronomican's heart, the point from which the light emanated, the place where psykers were converted most efficiently from matter into energy. The beings occupying these positions barely resembled humans. They were silhouettes of fire, bodies consumed but consciousnesses remaining, locked in the moment of dissolution, experiencing death as a continuous state rather than an ending. I was placed in the empty position, the restraints locked around what remained of my body, the equipment attached. Though most of my biological functions had already ceased, I was technically dead by any reasonable medical definition, kept functional only through psychic binding and mechanical support. Then the core's full power touched me. Everything that came before, all the burning in the outer, middle, and inner choirs, was merely preparation for this. The light here did not consume or immolate or dissolve. It annihilated, breaking down existence itself into component energies that were immediately redirected into the Astronomican's purpose. I blazed. My consciousness expanded to encompass the entire galaxy, even as it contracted to a single point of agonized awareness. I was everywhere the light reached, experiencing every navigator who used it, every ship that followed its guidance, every soul in the Imperium that felt its distant presence. And simultaneously, I was nowhere, an identity so fragmented by the burning that the concept of self became meaningless. I saw Katya, not through the link or through demonic temptation, but directly, my consciousness somehow touching hers across the vast distance between Terra and Verdan Prime. She was alive, working in the astropathic choir, older now, graying, but stable, healthy, continuing. My sacrifice had succeeded. She lived because I burned. Was it worth it? The question formed and dissolved before I could consider it. Worth implied evaluation, judgment, choice. I was beyond such considerations. I was burning, and that was all I was, all I would ever be. The choice had been made 3 weeks ago. Now there was only consequence, only service, only the light. Through the core's awareness, I touched something vast beyond comprehension. The Emperor himself, or what remained of him. The consciousness that maintained the Astronomican through will alone. He was not aware of me as an individual. Could not be, given his scale. But I felt his purpose, absolute and unyielding. The determination to maintain humanity's light, regardless of cost. He had been burning for 10,000 years. I had been burning for 3 weeks. His suffering made mine meaningless by comparison. Yet both were part of the same eternal sacrifice. We burned together. God and psyker, emperor and volunteer. Distinction lost in shared purpose. And I understood finally why volunteers were tragic. Not because we suffered more than conscripts, but because we carried responsibility. The pressed and conscripted could rage at fate, could maintain innocence through victimhood. But we who volunteered had chosen this. Every moment of agony was self-inflicted. Every hour of service was our own decision made manifest. We could not blame the Imperium, or fate, or necessity. We could only burn, knowing we had chosen to burn. My body was almost gone now, converted entirely to energy. Barely a shadow remaining. My consciousness was fragmenting, unable to maintain coherence under the core's intensity. I had minutes remaining, perhaps seconds, before even my psychic presence dissolved completely into the light. Katya's face appeared one final time in my failing awareness. Older, content, alive. The trade was real, her life for mine. And in this final moment, I knew the answer to the question that had haunted me. Was she worth this? Yes and no. And the question itself was meaningless. I had chosen, and choice created consequence. And consequence was absolute regardless of worth. I would burn to nothing having saved her. And whether that was noble or foolish would be a question for others to answer. I had no perspective left to judge. The light intensified beyond final limits. My consciousness began its terminal fragmentation, and I burned. There is no language for what happens in the core. Human thought requires structure, sequence, Causality. In the core, all three collapsed into meaningless fragments. I was dying, and had already died and would die eternally, all states existing simultaneously in the moment stretched to infinity. My body was gone, not destroyed but transcended, matter converted to pure psychic energy that fed directly into the Astronomican. What remained was consciousness without substrate, awareness without physical anchor. I existed as intention alone, the last fragments of identity burning like afterimages. The light here was not separate from me but was me, my dissolution indistinguishable from its radiance. Every ship that navigated by the Astronomican used my agony as fuel. Every navigator who gazed upon it saw my suffering converted to guidance. I was being spent like currency, my existence traded for humanity's survival, 1 microsecond at a time. Through the core's impossible awareness, I perceived the full machinery of the Golden Throne. Above us, beyond uncountable layers of rock and architecture, the Emperor sat upon his throne of gold and agony. 10,000 years he had burned there. His body a withered husk, kept alive by technology and will. His consciousness spread so thin across the Imperium that individuality had become meaningless. He was doing what we did, what I did, but at scale that made our suffering infinitesimal by comparison. The Astronomican was his will made manifest, his psychic might channeled through the throne's mechanisms and amplified by our sacrifice. We provided the fuel. He provided the direction. Together, we created the light that prevented humanity's extinction. I felt the throne's mechanisms, ancient beyond comprehension. Technology from the Dark Age merged with arts that predated human understanding. The machine was failing, degrading over millennia despite the Adeptus Mechanicus's desperate maintenance. And as it failed, more psykers were required to compensate. More souls burned to maintain the same intensity of light. 10,000 psykers daily now. The number had grown from hundreds in the heresy's aftermath, increasing as the throne weakened. Eventually it would require hundreds of thousands, millions, an unsustainable harvest that would drain the Imperium of psykers faster than they could be born. And then the light would fail, and humanity would fragment in the darkness, and everything would end. This knowledge should have horrified me. Instead, I felt only clarity. The Imperium was dying slowly, its survival purchased at costs that grew steeper each century. We in the core were not heroes but symptoms, evidence of institutional decay dressed in noble language. And yet the alternative to this decline was immediate extinction. So we burned anyway, buying time humanity would use to postpone, rather than prevent its doom. I felt other psykers in the core burning alongside me. 23 consciousnesses fragmenting in concert, our combined dissolution creating resonance that amplified the light. We were not individuals but voices in a choir, our deaths harmonizing into something that transcended our separate suffering. One of them reached toward me through the link, a consciousness that had maintained more coherence than expected. I felt his psychic signature and recognized it impossibly. Dmitri, the volunteer from the black ship who I thought had died weeks ago. He had not died but had burned through the choirs faster than I, his augmentic systems making him vulnerable to the light's consumption. He had reached the core before me and had been burning here for hours or days. Time meaningless at this intensity. Brother, his thought voice came through the link, barely coherent. We chose this. Remember, we chose. Had we? My choice seemed distant now, made by someone I no longer was. But the choice's consequences remained absolute, binding me to service even after identity had dissolved. I had volunteered, and therefore I was complicit, and therefore I could not claim innocence in my own annihilation. Another consciousness touched mine, older, having burned far longer. I felt his memories fragmenting as mine were, experienced his long service stretching back months rather than weeks. He had been part of the core since before I arrived on Terra, burning at this intensity for duration that should have been impossible. His name was lost. His identity eroded to basic awareness and the memory of having volunteered to save someone, though who was forgotten. Does it matter? His thought came, responding to questions I had not consciously formed. Does the reason matter when the burning is absolute? We volunteered. We burn. The rest is philosophy for those with minds intact enough to contemplate. The whispers intensified in the core's burning. Here, where the material and immaterial merged, daemons pressed closest, their voices immediate and overwhelming. They no longer offered escape or relief, but simply demanded acknowledgement, screaming their existence against the light that held them at bay. I felt one of the core psykers succumb. His consciousness opened to the whispers, accepted their promises, and was immediately flooded with warp corruption. The transformation began instantly. His psychic presence, darkening as demonic essence, merged with what remained of his soul. The response was instantaneous. A custodian appeared in the core, one of the Emperor's personal guardians who never left the throne's vicinity. He was massive, golden. His guardian spear moved faster than thought, striking the corrupted psyker with force that annihilated both body and soul simultaneously. The corruption was purged before it could spread. The gap in the core filled within seconds by another psyker dragged from the inner choir. The custodian's gaze swept across the remaining core members, evaluating us for signs of taint. I felt his awareness touch mine, felt him assess my dying consciousness for corruption. I was clean, barely. My dissolution too advanced to permit demonic infiltration. He moved on, ascending back to wherever custodians waited, eternal guardians, maintaining vigilance that never wavered. My psychic reserves approached absolute zero. The medical equipment keeping my body marginally alive began failing, unable to compensate for damage that had exceeded all parameters. My heart stopped for the final time. My brain ceased electrical activity, my last biological functions terminated in cascade. And yet I continued burning. The binding held my consciousness intact even after clinical death, forced me to continue serving, to keep contributing to the light. I was a ghost, a psychic echo, trapped in the machinery, unable to die completely while the binding remained. Through the core's awareness, I felt Katya one final time. She was teaching now, training younger psykers in the astropathic choir, passing on knowledge and technique. She lived well. My sacrifice had given her decades, perhaps. Enough time to find purpose, to serve productively, to experience life's small joys between duties. Had she thought of me during these weeks? Had she mourned? Or had she moved forward, accepting my choice as necessary? I would never know. The distance between us was absolute now, maintained not by space, but by the fundamental difference between living and burning. Was she worth this? The question returned for the last time, demanding answer even as I lost the capacity to answer. My fragmenting consciousness could not maintain the evaluation required. Worth implied values, judgments, comparisons. I possessed none of these. I was burning and she was living, and the relationship between these facts was simply causal, empty of moral weight. But beneath the dissolution, in the last coherent fragment of what had been Alexei, I felt something that might have been peace. I had chosen. In an imperium where most psykers were enslaved, conscripted, or executed without agency, I had made a genuine choice. That the choice led to horror did not erase its authenticity. I was victim and volunteer simultaneously. Suffering I had inflicted upon myself, for reasons that remained valid even after identity dissolved. My consciousness fragmented beyond recovery. The binding could no longer hold what was already gone. I felt myself dissolving completely into the light, becoming indistinguishable from the Astronomican itself. The last fragment of Alexei Volnov, brother and volunteer, burned to nothing, and something remained. Not consciousness, but imprint, psychic residue that could not disperse while the binding held. I became an echo in the light, a ghost haunting the machinery I had fed, no longer serving actively but present, trapped, witnessing without awareness. The core continued burning. My position was filled immediately by another psyker dragged from the inner choir. The light never dimmed, the Imperium never noticed, and I remained, neither alive nor dead, bound to the Astronomican in ways I could not understand or escape. This was the final truth of volunteering. Death was not the end. Service continued beyond life, beyond consciousness, beyond anything that could be called existence. We burned, and then we burned as echoes, and perhaps we burned forever, fragments trapped in the light we had volunteered to feed. I had saved Katya. The cost was eternity, and I had chosen it freely. Death was not release. I had believed, in whatever remained of my capacity to believe, that dissolution would mean ending, that burning to nothing would grant the peace denied during service. I was wrong. Death in the core was merely transformation, a shift from active burning to passive haunting. I existed as psychic residue, an imprint burned into the Astronomican structure. No body, no consciousness in any conventional sense, but awareness remained. Fragmented, attenuated, scattered across the light like ash on wind, yet somehow still perceiving. I was a ghost in the machinery, trapped by the binding that could not release what no longer existed to release. Time became strange beyond description. I experienced the choir from within now, not as participant, but as medium. Each psyker who burned added their suffering to the accumulated residue, their psychic signatures blending with mine and thousands of others who had burned before. We were layers of extinction, geological strata of anguish compressed into the light's structure. I watched new psykers arrive at the choir, watched them processed through preparation, witnessed their first rotations, felt their progressive deterioration. They burned through the same cycles I had experienced, and I could not warn them, could not offer guidance or comfort. I was merely present, a passive witness to suffering that never ceased. Most were conscripts, pressed into service without choice. They raged or wept or retreated into catatonia, their victimhood absolute. I felt their innocence, their fundamental lack of responsibility for their fate. The Imperium had selected them, transported them, and was now consuming them. They could hate purely, blame externally, die knowing they had been murdered by the system they served. But occasionally, so rarely the intervals stretched across months or years, a volunteer would arrive. Someone who had chosen, who had walked willingly into the burning. Each time, I recognized the tragedy of their choice reflected in my own. Each time, I witnessed them learning what I had learned, that volunteering changed nothing about the burning, but everything about the burden. I saw a woman volunteer to save her daughter, saw her burn through the choirs faster than expected, reaching the core in 8 days. Saw her final moments when she understood her daughter would grow up knowing her mother had chosen this horror, would carry the weight of that sacrifice forever. The woman's last coherent thought was regret, not at volunteering, but at the burden she had placed on the child she saved. I saw a man volunteer out of genuine faith, believing the propaganda about sacred duty. Saw his conviction erode rotation by rotation as reality contradicted doctrine. Saw him die in the middle choir. His faith shattered. His final thought, a bitter understanding that the Emperor did not notice his devotion. That service was anonymous consumption regardless of the heart's intentions. I saw a young psyker volunteer to escape a worse fate, believing the Astronomican offered death with dignity compared to the alternative. Saw him learn that dignity was impossible while burning, that no amount of noble intention could make immolation graceful. Saw him beg for true death that would not come, trapped in the binding that forced service beyond any reasonable duration. Each volunteer carried their own reasons, their own justifications for choosing the unchosen. Each believed their circumstances made the choice necessary, or meaningful, or holy. Each learned too late that choice created responsibility without granting control, that volunteering made you complicit in your consumption without allowing you to dictate its terms. Through my diffused awareness, I perceived other echoes like myself. Hundreds of thousands of psychic imprints trapped in the Astronomican structure, residue from 10,000 years of burning. We formed layers of accumulated suffering. Each generation of psykers, adding to the weight. Some imprints were ancient beyond measure, dating to the heresy's aftermath. Their identities eroded to basic emotional signatures. Others were recent, still carrying fragments of personality that had not yet dissolved into the whole. Among these echoes, volunteers were identifiable by a specific resonance, a psychic marker that indicated choice rather than compulsion. We were rare, even among the dead. Perhaps one echo in 10,000 bearing this signature, and we carried something the conscripted dead did not: eternal questioning. The conscripts could rest in their victimhood, their suffering absolved by lack of agency. But we volunteers questioned endlessly, turning over our choices in whatever remained of our capacity for thought. Was it worth it? Could we have chosen differently? Did our reasons justify our fates? The questions had no answers, but persisted anyway. Fragments of identity that refused final dissolution. I felt Katya through the connection that bound us, faint but persistent across the years. She aged. She served in the astropathic choir for 23 more years after my death, before her own abilities began to fail. She retired to a quiet posting, administrative work that kept her useful without demanding the psychic exertion that had destabilized her initially. She lived to 67, far longer than expected for a sanctioned psyker. She died peacefully in sleep, her passing noted in the choir's records with respectful ceremony. My sacrifice had given her 44 years. From the moment I volunteered until her death, she lived 44 years that she would not have had. Was that worth 3 weeks of burning followed by decades of haunting? The question remained unanswerable, but the mathematics were clear. I had traded my existence for hers, and the trade had been honored. She had children, I discovered through the tenuous connection. 2 daughters, both sensitive, both tested and found to possess minor psychic ability. Neither strong enough for choir work. They were marked and monitored but permitted to live normal lives under supervision. They had children in turn. Katya's genetic legacy spreading into the Imperium's vast population. And some of those descendants manifested stronger abilities. I felt too taken by black ships over the decades following Katya's death. Felt them processed, sanctioned, assigned to various duties. One died during sanctioning, his soul insufficiently resilient to withstand the binding. The other survived, and served in an astropathic choir on a distant world, living and dying without ever knowing. His great-grandmother had been saved by an uncle who volunteered for the Astronomican. The bloodline continued, carriers of the genetic predisposition towards psychic ability that ran in our family. How many of Katya's descendants would eventually burn in this same choir? How many would stand where I had stood? Would burn as I had burned? Because I had chosen to save one life, and thus permitted the genetic line to continue. The thought should have horrified me. Instead, I felt only the weight of consequences extending beyond intention. I had saved Katya to save Katya, not to propagate a bloodline that would feed the Astronomican for generations. But consequence cared nothing for intention, would burn as I had burned. Because I had chosen to save one life, and thus permitted the genetic line to continue, the thought should have horrified me. Instead, I felt only the weight of consequences extending beyond intention. I had saved Katya to save Katya, not to propagate a bloodline that would feed the Astronomican for generations. But consequence cared nothing for intention. My choice created ripples extending far beyond its immediate purpose. Through my diffused awareness, I witnessed the Imperium's slow decline. Decades became centuries. Centuries became millennia. The Astronomican grew marginally weaker, despite consuming more psykers. The Golden Throne's degradation, requiring ever greater compensation. The number of daily sacrifices increased from 10,000 to 12,000 to 15,000. The harvest intensified, black ships ranging farther, returning with fuller holds, the choir consuming an ever larger proportion of the Imperium's psykers, and volunteers remained vanishingly rare. Perhaps 1 in 100,000 chosen. The rest pressed or conscripted. The propaganda continued. The noble language persisted, but the truth was known to anyone who investigated. Volunteering for the Astronomican was choosing horror, while the alternative was merely horror inflicted upon you. I watched the Imperium stumble through crises that should have destroyed it. Watched the Great Rift tear reality. Watched the Astronomican flicker, and nearly fail before the Emperor's will reasserted itself. Watched new threats emerge and old enemies return. Through it all, the choir burned, psykers consumed by the 1,000 daily. Their sacrifice, the foundation upon which humanity's continued existence rested. And I remained, neither alive nor dead, trapped in the light I had volunteered to feed. No escape, no dissolution, no final peace. Just eternal witnessing, watching others burn as I had burned, watching volunteers arrive and learn what I had learned, watching the Imperium persist at costs that grew steeper with each passing century. Katya was long dead, her life the purpose that had driven my choice. Her descendants spread across multiple worlds, some sensitive, some not, none knowing the sacrifice that had permitted their existence. The trade was complete, the bargain honored. Her life for mine, extended family for eternal haunting. Was she worth it? The question echoed through whatever remained of me, unanswerable as always. Worth implied evaluation, and I had lost the capacity for judgment. I could only witness, could only persist, could only carry the weight of having chosen freely what others suffered by compulsion. This was the final truth of volunteering. Not merely that you would burn, but that you would burn forever. That choice created bonds that transcended death. That responsibility persisted beyond consciousness. The conscripts could die and disperse. The volunteers remained, trapped by the agency we had claimed, bound by the choices we had made. I had volunteered to save Katya. I had succeeded, and I would carry the weight of that success eternally. Watching the choir consume generation after generation, knowing I had chosen to become part of this machinery, unable to escape the binding I had accepted freely. They say the soul weighs 21 grams. I know now it weighs exactly as much as the choice that damns it, and that weight never lightens. My name was Alexei Volnov. I volunteered for the Astronomican to save my sister. She lived 44 years because I burned for 3 weeks and have haunted the light for centuries since. The trade was honored. The mathematics were fair. And I would make the same choice again, knowing the cost, which makes me either blessed or damned beyond measure. Never volunteer for the Astra Telepathica. Not because you will die, everyone dies in the Imperium, but because you will die knowing you chose it. The conscripts can hate their fate. The pressed can claim innocence. But volunteers carry eternal responsibility. I saved Katya. But I damned myself to endless question. Was she worth this? I burn in that question still. I will burn in it forever. And I chose this freely, which is the true horror. The light continues. I remain. And choice binds tighter than any chain.